Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's edition of the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. In early 2020s, we started seeing something shift in the world of work. Remote jobs became normal. Now think about that. They became normal. AI tools moved from experimental to everyday use, and companies started rewriting what work even means. So looking at the 2030s, we will enter this new phase of the workforce, one that is less about the job titles and more about the skills, flexibility, and human-machine collaboration. Now, the interesting thing I want you to think about, I've been talking about human-machine, man-to-machine, all of this for several decades. And if you've been following our coverage here at connectedworld.com, you know we've been tracking these shifts very closely for a very long time. And as I just said, for decades, especially how organizations are adapting to rapid technological change. So for today's episode, we're going to take a look ahead rather than just a look back. And we're going to explore the workforce of 2030, the trends shaping it today, and what individuals and organizations can start doing now to prepare. And some of that I think is important, especially if we look back, because I don't think you can always look forward if you don't think about the trends of the past. So let's set the stage for the future workforce trends. The workforce of 2030 will not be defined by one big shift. It will be defined by several forces moving all at the same time. Now, we're all talking about artificial intelligence and how it is automating tasks, not entire jobs, but certain tasks. And all of that makes sense. Remote and hybrid work are more common. We get that. Perhaps more importantly, companies are moving from hire for titles to hire for skills. And in some cases, that makes sense because this is what you might say is a fundamental shift at the way we think about things. Because when you hire for skills, you open the door more for flexible work models, including contract work, maybe even project-based engagements. And you can even think about it, we hear a lot of this every day, these fractional leadership roles. So let's talk more about one of the fastest growing structural changes in the modern workforce, and that's what I just mentioned, this fractional work, because I find this very interesting. Instead of hiring full-time executive or specialists, companies are increasingly turning to experienced professionals who work across multiple organizations. So think about it this way. The model is especially strong in startups and mid-sized companies that need senior experience without, let's say, full-time overhead. You don't have to pay all those taxes and all these other things that might come with it, but that's another conversation for another time. But research and insights from Go Fractional Insights show a clear pattern. Organizations are prioritizing agility over static team structures. And a lot of that, when you think about what kind of people are still in the workforce, that makes a lot of sense. So today's companies need access to experience and on-demand teams that can actually work in when markets move faster. And those markets are faster than annual, let's say, planning cycles. So I was trying to think of what those words might be. And now let's move outward a little bit more as we talk. One of the biggest drivers of the 2030 workforce is artificial intelligence, but not in the way people often expect. This is not a simple story of just replacement. It's a story of augmentation. Now, I know you've heard augmentation, this is what AI is going to do, but AI will handle those repetitive tasks, data processing, let's say basic content generation, and initial analysis, because AI can't do it all. Humans will still drive those key decision-making, strategy, relationships building, and what I consider the most important, creative problem solving. And why this is so important is because AI is not that creative one. But this creates perhaps an even new problem, maybe a bigger problem. The skills gap is not just about technical knowledge. We need to understand it's about adaptability. Adaptability because we're looking at all of these different things together. And when we look at all of them together, because to work alongside of AI, workers will need to constantly relearn their own jobs. Now think about that for a second. Relearning your own job. Education systems are already under pressure because of this shift. And how do they educate? Traditional degree-based models are being challenged by these micro-credentials, online learning platforms, and workplace-based training. So if we think about it more and we look ahead, in the 2030 workplace and that workforce that we're talking about, learning will not be something you finish before you start working. Now think about what I just said there, because it will be something you will do while you work. Now it's like whistle while you work. Well, it's learning while you work. Organizations that fail to build these internal upskilling systems will struggle to keep with technological change. And we're seeing it already, the fast pace of all of this change. So you have to stay on top of it. So let's talk about another major trend is the rise of the portfolio career. So instead of one job for decades, many people will work across multiple roles, industries, and even time zones. We're already seeing it. You're collaborating with people in other countries, other time zones. I know I have it now, and as a journalist, communicating with so many brilliant leaders across the globe. A marketeer may also be a consultant. I see that in so many people that I consult with, helping them understand what's happening in technology, innovation, the way to communicate. So an engineer may also be a part-time educator, and they should be. So finance professional, let's think about that one, might work fractionally with 3 different companies. This is not futuristic idea anymore, and you need to understand that right now as we talk about 2030. It's already happening in the early forms in many companies and in many industries, and it will expand as digital infrastructure makes cross-company seamless. It looks, if you think about it, like a few real-world examples that we're talking about is where this is heading, but in the tech industry, companies are already structuring teams around project outcomes rather than fixed departments. And I think this is really important because we have to think about those that learn from it, those that grow with it, and those that become real leaders. So in healthcare, AI tools are supporting diagnostics, freeing up specialists to focus on complex cases. And this is how we really learn from things. In construction, let's think about this. This is a great example. AI can enable project monitoring, schedule optimization, risk detection, helping teams really reduce delays and improve safety. And what I really appreciate about that is in construction, we've always talked about being laggards, but look at how much more advancement it's doing to help construction, which has always struggled in the past, to be ahead of the game instead of being behind the game or being late in the game. In manufacturing, AI can predict equipment failure, optimize production, allowing workers to spend more time on process improvement and complex operations. So there's a balance to be struck here, for sure. There's no question about that, because the more technology advances, the more important human skills become. So we need to understand that. We need to think about critical thinking, communication, as we just discussed, and ethical decision-making. This is so critical, that ethical decision-making. The workforce of the future, as we just said here, of 2030, will not only need people who can use tools. It's not just about, using a hammer or how well you use the pen. It will need people who can question them, interpret them, and decide when not to use them. Not only when to use them, but when not to use them. And that's when the ethical question comes in. This brings us to a more practical question. So let's think about this. How do organizations prepare for this shift? We might have just said 2030. So how do individuals stay relevant without constantly feeling like they are constantly playing catch up? It feels like you're constantly catching all these balls that are being thrown at you, and the speed of change is overwhelming. So the answer is not to predict exact job titles of the future, because that's nearly impossible. We just don't know what all those job titles are going to be or what you're going to be having to do. Instead, it's to build resilience into skill development and organizational design. That's really what you're thinking about. So let's talk about what that looks like, perhaps in practice, because that's what I think you need to be thinking about. Companies will need to move to the skill-based hiring systems. Much like many of the things we've talked about in the past, this means building job descriptions around capabilities rather than traditional titles. So we've been talking about that all along here, but it also means using project-based teams that can form and reform quickly. So one way to think about it is, on the individual side, workers will need to invest in continuous learning pathways that are very practical. Now, the way that I think about this is I'll bring this close to something that matters, or maybe I'll close this with a bigger perspective. Then this is the way we could wrap up the show today. So here would be my opinion for all of you to think about. The workforce of 2030 is not about technology, and we talk always about technology. It's about structure. It is about how we organize human talent in a way where we build. Information is abundant, and automation is everywhere. We get that. The winners in the next era will not necessarily be companies with the biggest teams, because we don't necessarily need the biggest teams. They will be the companies that adapt well and have the most adaptable ones overall. The most adaptable teams, maybe is the way we should say it. Organizations continue to design around static workforces, may find themselves outpaced by those that embrace fluid, on-demand talent networks. Kind of interesting if we think about that's the team of the future. Very fluid, adaptable teams. So if I were to give you my tip, is I was thinking about how I was going to present this to you all today, start building for a more resilient organization. For individuals, that means developing skills that can evolve over time. And those are the people you want to think about. For organizations, it means testing fractional roles, project-based teams, and skills-versed hiring models right now. And for both individuals and organizations, it means treating learning as an ongoing opportunity. Hire those individuals who are willing to learn on the job and that you trust that they're constantly learning. Because by 2030, the most valuable skill may simply be the ability to keep evolving. And I know as an organization, you're sitting there going, I need people who get things done, but you also need people who are willing to learn to get things done. Now keep that in mind. That's what you want. So, listeners, I'm out of time for this segment, and I want you to make sure you subscribe. We've got a very changing Peggy Smedley show, and we want to continue to be doing what we're doing now. It's more storytelling, more inviting you in to understand what the future is going to be for all of us, not just our show, but what you're going to need for all of you as organizations and individuals. So share your thoughts with me on X at Connected World, or follow me on LinkedIn and continue the conversation there. Please check out our website or our newsletter and all of our blogs at connectworld.com or smedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, and you can hear our podcast every Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.